The vast, domed amphitheater of the Galactic Academy buzzed with anticipation. Today was no ordinary day. Professor Zaltor, the esteemed alien academic with 4 gleaming eyes and scales that shimmered like starlight, stood at the center of the arena. A legend in engineering and survival sciences, his challenges were notorious for testing even the most brilliant minds across the galaxy. "Welcome, students," Zaltor's voice resonated, his twin tongues giving his words a unique cadence. "Today, we explore the core of survival, shelter. You have 1 hour to construct a functional, weatherproof shelter using only the materials provided. The materials were no ordinary tools. Instead, they were an assortment of alien metals, crystalline adhesives, and flexible plant fibers native to various planets. The assignment was meant to push the students' creativity and problem-solving abilities to their limits. Among the crowd was Cadet James Carter, the only human in the academy. Despite being the smallest and least physically imposing species present, James had earned a reputation for his unorthodox methods. But today, as he surveyed the alien materials, James felt out of place. The others were already murmuring in their native tongues, analyzing and theorizing, while he was trying to figure out what half the items even did. Professor Zaltor's slitted pupils narrowed as he scanned the students. Remember, the shelter must endure simulated weather conditions, torrential rain, high winds, and sub-zero temperatures. Begin. The arena exploded into activity. Tentacles, claws, and appendages of all kinds flurried over the materials, constructing frames, sealing joints, and weaving walls. James, however, stood still, watching the chaos unfold. He recalled a piece of advice his grandfather once gave him: "Simplicity is genius." "All right, let's do this," James muttered to himself. He picked up the alien plant fibers, noting their flexibility and tensile strength. Next, he examined the crystalline adhesive and tested its binding properties. Within moments, an idea clicked into place. Grinning, James knelt down and began assembling his structure. His approach was methodical yet unorthodox. He created an A-frame structure, using the plant fibers for the frame and reinforcing it with overlapping layers of flexible metal sheets. He sealed the edges meticulously with the adhesive, ensuring there were no gaps for wind or water to penetrate. The shelter was small but efficient, designed to conserve heat and provide maximum stability. 10 minutes later, James stepped back and surveyed his work. It wasn't fancy, but it was sturdy and functional. The other students were far from finished. Many struggled to balance the exotic materials, and others were entangled in overly complex designs. James's shelter stood in stark contrast: simple, compact, and complete. Professor Zaltor approached, his scales shifting from emerald to a contemplative gold. "Cadet Carter," he said, inspecting the structure with his many eyes. "Are you finished?" "Yes, Professor," James replied confidently. Zaltor tapped the shelter with a claw, testing its stability. He muttered something in his native language, then turned to James. "Interesting. We shall see if it endures." The rest of the hour dragged on as James watched his classmates labor over their designs. Some constructed sprawling domes. Others attempted towering structures. The amphitheater grew tense as the clock ticked down, and finally, Zaltor called time. "Students, prepare for the test phase," he announced. Massive simulators descended from the ceiling, projecting artificial weather conditions over each shelter. The first trial, torrential rain, began. Many shelters leaked or collapsed as the deluge poured down, but James's A-frame shed the water effortlessly, its angled design guiding the liquid away. Next came the winds. Gale force gusts ripped through the arena, toppling several shelters. James's compact structure barely wavered, its low profile and reinforced joints holding firm. Finally, the sub-zero temperatures arrived. Frost formed instantly, and brittle materials cracked under the pressure. James's shelter remained intact, its simple design preventing structural weaknesses. As the trials concluded, Professor Zaltor raised a clawed hand. Ceased the simulations. Silence fell over the amphitheater as the professor strode to the center. His gaze swept over the remaining shelters, lingering on James's. "Cadet Carter," Zaltor began, his voice filled with an uncharacteristic reverence. "Your shelter not only survived but excelled. Tell us, how did you achieve this in 10 minutes? James scratched the back of his head, smiling sheepishly. "I just kept it simple, Professor. Focused on functionality over form." The professor's golden scales shimmered as he nodded slowly. "An admirable philosophy. Let this be a lesson to all. Innovation does not require complexity. Sometimes, the simplest solution is the most effective. The alien students exchanged looks of shock and admiration, their pride wounded but their respect for the human undeniable. For the first time, they realized that the diminutive species from Earth might hold more than a few surprises to ask the other. Students dismantled their failed shelters with dejected faces. James stood beside his creation, now surrounded by curious onlookers. The alien cadets, previously dismissive of the human's unassuming presence, began peppering him with questions. "How did you know the plant fibers could hold such tension?" asked a slender, insect-like student with shimmering wings. James shrugged. "I tested a small piece first, pulled on it, twisted it. Figured if it could take that abuse, it'd handle the weight." Another student, a towering reptilian with scales darker than midnight, stepped forward. "Your structure is so basic. Why didn't you add any defenses or decorations like the rest of us?" James grinned. "Because the goal was survival, not winning an art contest." The crowd murmured, their pride bruised but their curiosity piqued. Professor Zaltor raised a clawed hand, silencing the chatter. His eyes, glowing faintly, fixed on James. "Cadet Carter, your success has disrupted conventional thinking. However, the true test of a shelter is not in its construction, but in its adaptability. Tell me, do you believe your structure could endure unexpected challenges?" James frowned, sensing a twist. "I think so, Professor." Zaltor gestured toward the shelter. "Then let us find out." With a press of his multi-fingered hand against a control panel, the arena transformed. The artificial terrain shifted, and the environment grew hostile. The air thickened with a hot, sulfuric haze, and the ground trembled as simulated quakes rippled across the surface. A swarm of mechanical drones, programmed to mimic local predators from various planets, emerged from hidden compartments in the walls. The crowd gasped. "He's testing the shelter against active threats?" One student whispered, disbelief evident in their voice. James's mind raced. The shelter was built to withstand weather and temperature extremes. But this was a whole new level. He took a deep breath and focused. "All right, let's see if you've got what it takes." The first quake hit. Shelters around the arena began collapsing as the ground heaved violently. James's A-frame, with its low center of gravity and flexible joints, swayed but held firm. The angle design distributed the tremors evenly, preventing catastrophic damage. Next came the drones. Small, scuttling machines with sharp appendages and buzzing wings swarmed the arena, testing for weaknesses. They scraped and clawed at James's structure, but the overlapping metal sheets proved too tough to penetrate. The adhesive, which had hardened into an almost crystalline state, held the structure together like a fortress. The sulfuric haze thickened, simulating a toxic atmosphere. James silently cursed himself for not considering ventilation. But then, he noticed something. The plant fibers, slightly porous, were filtering the air. He hadn't planned for this, but his choice of materials had unintentionally saved him. The crowd watched in stunned silence as James's shelter withstood everything thrown at it. One by one, the drones retreated, their programming recognizing the structure as impenetrable. The quake subsided, and the haze cleared. Professor Zaltor stepped forward, his gleaming eyes locked on James. "Remarkable," he said, his voice softer now. "Your shelter has passed every trial, even those designed to simulate the harshest planetary conditions. Tell me, Cadet Carter, was this luck?" James laughed nervously. "Some of it, sure. But most of it was just sticking to the basics, making sure everything worked together and didn't overcomplicate things." Zaltor regarded him thoughtfully. "Your approach is deceptively simple yet deeply effective. It is a reminder that survival often depends on practicality, not grandeur. Today, you have taught this academy something invaluable." The students, though initially resentful, began to applaud. Tentatively at first, then with genuine respect. James felt his face flush as he scratched the back of his neck, embarrassed by the attention. "Cadet Carter," Zaltor continued, "your success is not just a testament to your ingenuity but a challenge to us all to rethink what we believe to be superior design. I hereby award you the Galactic Mark of Ingenuity, a recognition reserved for students who push the boundaries of creativity." The amphitheater erupted in cheers as Zaltor pinned a shimmering badge to James's uniform. It glowed faintly, a symbol of his achievement. James looked out at the crowd, realizing that he had not only earned their respect but also proven that humans, though often underestimated, had a unique way of thinking that could surprise even the most advanced species in the galaxy. As the crowd dispersed, James stood alone for a moment, staring at his shelter. What had started as a simple challenge had turned into something far greater. He couldn't help but smile, wondering what other surprises the galaxy held and how. Many more opportunities he'd have to prove that humanity, though small in stature, was mighty in spirit. The Galactic Academy was abuzz with excitement following the Shelter Challenge. News of James's unexpected success spread like wildfire across the campus. For weeks, his fellow cadets couldn't stop discussing the sheer ingenuity of his design, and many began to seek him out for advice. But while James enjoyed the newfound camaraderie, he couldn't shake the feeling that Professor Zaltor had something bigger planned. The cryptic way the professor had spoken during the challenge hinted that James's test wasn't entirely over. A new challenge unveiled 2 weeks later. James was summoned to Zaltor's private office. The room, a blend of advanced technology and natural elements from the professor's homeworld, was both intimidating and beautiful. Bioluminescent plants lined the walls, casting a soft, otherworldly glow over shelves filled with ancient artifacts and holographic blueprints. Cadet Carter, Zaltor began, motioning for James to sit. I have been reviewing your performance. Your ability to adapt and innovate is rare. Thank you, Professor, James replied, unsure of where this was going. Zaltor leaned forward, his golden scales catching the light. Your success has inspired me to propose an experiment, one that could redefine survival engineering across the galaxy. James raised an eyebrow. An experiment? The professor nodded. A joint mission. You and a team of select cadets will travel to an uninhabited planet on the outer rim. Your task will be to establish a functional settlement, capable of sustaining life for 30 days. The planet is classified as a Category 4 death world. James's heart skipped a beat. Death worlds were notorious for their hostile environments, extreme weather, dangerous predators, and toxic atmospheres. Earth itself was considered a Category 3, and that already pushed humanity's limits. Why me? James asked, his voice steady despite the spike of adrenaline. Because your approach represents what this mission needs: practicality, adaptability, and resilience, Zaltor said. You will lead the engineering team. The others will rely on your expertise to survive. James hesitated. Leading a team of aliens who had once looked down on him? On a death world? It sounded like a recipe for disaster. But the professor's piercing gaze told him this wasn't just a challenge. It was an opportunity to prove humanity's worth on a galactic scale. I'll do it, James said, determination hardening his voice. The team assembles over the next week. The team was assembled. It included some of the best cadets from across the academy. Zyra, an insectoid with a knack for biology and environmental adaptation. Her knowledge of alien flora and fauna was unparalleled. Kryn, the towering reptilian who had mocked James during the Shelter Challenge but now seemed eager to prove himself. Irix, a silicon-based life form whose crystalline body allowed it to interface directly with technology. Tala, a feathered avian known for her incredible speed and precision, tasked with scouting and reconnaissance. James was surprised by how quickly the team accepted his leadership. While some were skeptical, most respected his success in the previous challenge. Before departing, Zaltor briefed them. The planet you are going to, Sci-Fi 7, is unstable. Its atmosphere is thin but breathable for short periods. The wildlife is aggressive, and the terrain is riddled with seismic activity. Your survival will depend on your ability to adapt. Arrival on Sci-Fi 7. The team arrived on Sci-Fi 7 aboard a small transport vessel. The planet's surface was as hostile as they had been warned. Jagged mountains, searing winds, and skies churning with sulfuric clouds. The air smelled metallic, and the ground cracked with every step. Welcome to paradise, James muttered, earning a few chuckles. The team immediately got to work. James directed them to set up a base camp using modular shelters provided by the Academy. But these shelters were temporary. Their real task was to construct a permanent settlement using only the planet's resources. James began analyzing the environment. The jagged rocks were dense but brittle, perfect for crafting tools and reinforced walls. The plant life, though sparse, included fibrous vines similar to those he had used in the Shelter Challenge. He noted everything, formulating a plan. The first crisis 3 days into the mission, disaster struck. A massive quake hit the region, splitting the ground near their camp. One of the modular shelters collapsed, narrowly missing Kryn, who managed to leap out of the way. We can't rely on these shelters anymore, James said, surveying the damage. We need to start building permanent structures. The team worked tirelessly under James's direction. He taught them to create a sturdy foundation using interlocking stone slabs and a binding agent Zyra, synthesized from local plants. The walls were constructed with a combination of reinforced stone and plant fibers, while Tala scouted for areas with natural protection from the elements. As they worked, the team began to trust James's leadership. Even Kryn, who had been the most skeptical, admitted, "Your methods are strange, human, but effective." A glimpse of humanity's strength one night. As the team huddled around a fire, exhausted but proud of their progress, Zyra asked, "James, how does your species do it? How do humans thrive on a death world?" James thought for a moment. "We adapt. Earth isn't easy, but we learn to turn challenges into opportunities. When the environment pushed us, we pushed back harder." The team listened in silence, their respect for James deepening. They realized that humanity's strength wasn't just in its ingenuity, but in its indomitable will to survive.